Welcome. We're in the midst of Paris Fashion Week and it's one of the last shows that we're going to be talking about, but it's the Saint Laurent show. Saint Laurent Paris, Saint Laurent, no one ever knows. But it's a great one to be talking about because obviously a very sort of controversial show in some ways, not least for the clothes on offer, but also for the whole way the brand's been changing recently. So a super exciting show and a super exciting set of panellists. I told you it'd be really cheesy. Who will introduce themselves, starting with you, Ian.
Hi, I'm Ian Wright and I'm Fashion Director for Drapers magazine.
Hi, I'm Tobin. I'm a fashion consultant and I currently head up the newly launched Self Just Bespoke.
Hi, I'm Harriet Walker and I'm the style editor at The Independent.
Let's talk a little bit about Saint Laurent and what we've seen sort of this year so far and also last year. What would you guys sort of give us a little history of what's been happening? I'll start with you, Harriet.
Everything. I was going to say that the main thing that I've taken away from the past year or the past season of Saint Laurent is a sort of multitude of voices. Everyone has an opinion on it. The only voice we haven't heard is his, and we don't appear to be likely to hear it at any time soon either. So the show is really where we get his opinion and his vision, which is why it's interesting, because no one seems to have any idea what he's about or what he's up to or what he's going to do next.
Do you think that kind of no interview move, because I know there was a lot written about this when he said he wasn't going to do any interviews after the show the Womenswear show last season. What do you guys think of that approach? Obviously, working somewhere like Drapers, you must rely a lot on being able to have access to.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one because, especially the last Womenswear being his ta-da, I'm back sort of moment, and then the collection having fallen a little bit flat, to say the least. You need that insight into where his head is at, especially considering it's like a here we are again, and it's, you know, post Pilates, Saint Laurent and new branding and blah blah blah. You need a bit of explanation, I felt, and that I don't think it enamors you to the people who are out there talking about it. It didn't, you know, he didn't have to hold court to like thousands of journalists and bloggers and and all, but just a few people just to get a little bit of something to go on.
Absolutely. It's not endearing, is it? It feels kind of retro as well, when there are so many platforms that you can express yourself on now. You don't have to do a sort of long read 3,000 word profile with someone. You can tweet, you can say one line backstage, which is what most other people do.
But we've seen stuff on Twitter, which is what's quite interesting, I thought, because you've gone from that, you know, that silence and that real kind of I'm above this, I don't care about fashion, you know, I am not going to get involved, but then this kind of burst of anger that come out on Twitter, and should designers tweet? Do you think they should stay far away from?
Angry designers, I think, should not tweet.
No.
I actually quite like the idea of designers tweeting because it makes them feel a bit more accessible, and it isn't this kind of closed house of, you know, sort of this sort of cordoned off part of the fashion world, because everyone wants to know about these people because they're the people that are creating the things that everyone's getting excited about. So I think Twitter's a great way of giving some access to that. But yeah, there needs to be kind of people need to know how to use it correctly. Otherwise, you're just, you know, you'll get good and bad, and you know, things will be off-brand and on-brand. It'll just be a bit of a mess of people talking about what they've had for dinner and reality TV, and then high fashion.
I think also Yves Saint Laurent was such a he had such a great turn of phrase. He came out with so many sort of brilliant aphorisms and quotes that you sort of feel that the house has a basis in that kind of wit, or you know, the sort of statement about what the intent is, what he's sort of offering for women. Yves Saint Laurent used to talk a lot about how he thought his clothes would sort of develop this female existence, feminine existence perhaps is better, but when there's nothing coming from that kind of, to go from that legacy to zilch apart from a fit of pique, it seems kind of disappointing.
I don't think he seems like he's that kind of man, because like you're saying, like if you think of Yves and you think of charisma and that wit, and I think Hedy doesn't seem like he would be like that, you know, if you were having a conversation with him. He's obviously you know, very, very talented, but I don't know if he's that kind of communicator. He seems quite cold and detached.
But it's interesting that you mentioned that, because this brings me to my next question, which is about, you know, if we are going to acknowledge that there's some sort of fault in how this whole sort of rebranding has been handled, does it lie with the designer, or is that issue of does it lie with the PRs? You know, we all read that brilliant piece in Business of Fashion, which I think was very on point from Imran, which, you know, said it's not actually if this had been handled, no matter how difficult the individual designer is, because I'm sure we can all acknowledge there are many difficult designers out there, if this had been handled differently by the broader kind of Saint Laurent team.
If you call it a fault, but as a journalist, that story was a gift, and it didn't do him any harm in terms of coverage. It may have changed opinions, but everyone was talking about a collection that, as Ian said, may have fallen a bit flat otherwise. So they still got the headlines, they still got the space, they got the coverage. So it might not have been a dreadful mistake in terms of getting the name out there and actually getting the collection seen.
Yeah, I think also we've slightly got to bear in mind that we live as part of the bubble, and whether the wider the consumers and people who will be buying it either hear about it or give a toss that this is actually going on, and whether it's just sort of like nice and gossipy for us to talk about and go, oh, she said that and he didn't say that and whatever. But I wonder whether it'd be interesting to know whether consumers give a monkeys.
Well, this is very interesting because, Jack, you obviously at Selfridges, you've just opened a really big concession there, and how is the consumer reacting with what we're seeing of that collection now? It's in kind of the real world rather than the fashion world.
To be honest, yeah, it's exactly like what you were just saying, that I don't really think they notice. I really don't think they even notice that Eve's dropped off of it. They just think, it's interesting though, people saying it differently now as well, because people aren't saying Saint Laurent, people are saying Saint Laurent. Like it's even, customers are reading it differently. And it's, I was reading a piece about, the whole controversial branding issue with this, and people saying, it's lost, what he's done is he's taken away the person from the brand, so it's become a stronger brand. So, like Chanel has dropped Coco Chanel and Dior has dropped Christian, and he's done the same with that. He's axed Yves, the man, away from it, and it's now Saint Laurent. But the consumer doesn't even notice.
And how are they interacting with the actual fashion? Is it proving popular? Because a lot of the reviews, like the criticism of the clothing, is this is inaccessible, it's that whole kind of skinny size 0 LA woman. But are you finding that actually people are interacting with it in a lot more of a...
100%, definitely. The collection, when you look at it broken down, is a lot more accessible than the extreme styling that you saw in the collection that was very controversial. When you're actually looking at the pieces, they're very desirable and can fit a lot of different women.
Yeah, that's something I took away from it, is that as it was styled, it didn't do it any favours, because it did just look like the collection you'd have expected Eddie to do, which wasn't very exciting from the kind of the onlooker. But I imagine I've not seen it in store, but I imagine it does look the business and is as individual pieces. Apart from the hats, mind, I wasn't really mad.
I'm interested because a lot was made also the decision, to kind of get rid of the tribute shoe, which was something like 60% of the accessories sale. As from a kind of a retail perspective, are the accessories proving popular? Because some critics did, pick up on, they said, it's taken away the tribute shoe, and what's he offering in return? Like a pretty simple.
Well, that's really interesting actually, because I thought this was really funny today when I was having a look at the accessories they have on offer, and right down towards one end they have, I think they call it their bowling bag, but it's the only part of Stefano's legacy that's still there, and the only reason they haven't got rid of it is because it is their best-selling bag, and it's the bags that still have the Y on the front. So it's the only Y, the only part of Eve's that is there at all. All the rest of it is completely heady, but that part they've had to keep just because it's a real commercial success and probably drives the numbers for them.
Which is interesting in itself actually, because I personally felt that what came out of him taking over was this sort of almost a monomania, or him having absolute control over everything, which is why I sort of wonder whether the press strategy came from a press office at all. I think everything sort of felt like it came from him.
Definitely.
And it's interesting that that's been sort of allowed to sneak through, that there is someone up top saying, no, you can't have your own way the whole time.
Because there was that moment when the whole website shut down and wasn't live at all, like the e-commerce part, and then it was like down for it was a day or so, and then came back up with all the new branding, and there was, and I don't even think that bag was part of what they were offering online at that time, and it was just so night and day that there was, I think that was part of the slight problem that the brand had pre the actual show, was that happened. It was so stark and it was so detached that people thought, well, where the hell is this going? Like, what's, you can't, we all learn from the past, and although obviously you want to make your own mark, you can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater.
This is interesting about learning from the past, because I've I was looking online at what sort of different people have been saying, firstly around that first show, but also subsequently, and there's been quite a lot of interesting talk about how he is going to use the archive and how he already has used the archive, because some of the people really picked up on that first collection as being, you know, very much just like a tribute to the house. You know, there was the safari, there was the smoking, whereas other people have gone in the opposite direction and kind of really criticised him and gone to town on criticism of him kind of completely putting his own stamp on things. So there's kind of these two different, very like conflicting ideas about what he's doing. He's either just kind of rehashing the archive in an unimaginative way, or he's trying to completely change things. And what are your guys' thoughts on that?
I feel like he did both, and that seems to me to be the most logical way of doing things. So,
yeah.
You know, maybe it did feel slightly Orwellian, the website and the sudden change and the dropping off of things and no one mentioning things ever again. But at the same time, the collection that we saw last season was so clearly, I thought, some kind of homage to what had gone before. Not to Stefano Pilati at all, I might add, but certainly to what the house stands for. You know, there were the classic pieces, they were reinvented, they were sort of twisted his way, things were a bit slimmer. But he did have to do something. You know, I think when we were talking about the expectation, the sort of weight of expectation with what had gone on with Raf at Dior as well. There was people were spoiling for something to happen, and someone was going to be annoyed whatever he did. So it was kind of a double bind, I thought, and I think that to choose that sort of duality of, you know, reinventing but also sticking with the classics is kind of the best way he could have done it. Perhaps there was something in the communication that could have been bettered.
I'm interested in this idea of, you know, communication and branding, because we all kind of touched on that a little bit, but like, is there a perfect way to rebrand, or is there a perfect way to go in as a designer? Like, what are the challenges that you think people are facing? Because I think a lot of the hiccups with this were related to how digital fashion is, because it made it was so easy for things to go viral, whether it was something like when he posted that ill-advised response to Kathy Horan, or whether it was that sort of email from the PRs with how to write Saint Laurent Paris. And do you think part of the reason this fell flat was purely because communication is so much more rapid now? Is it possible to rebrand in a digital age without having a huge hiccup if you rebrand that?
I think look, you know, give it some time, we'll look back on it and think that he did it very well, actually, because I think if you're going to rebrand, you're not going to do it in half measures. You're going to have to either go all the way with it or not at all. And by kind of doing it in such a, you know, extreme, what some might say heavy-handed way, I think he's probably done the right thing, really. And then in a few seasons we won't even be thinking about it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Everyone has a very short memory for that sort of thing anyway. And if, as long as consumers like what he's doing, you know, there isn't necessarily a problem. Maybe there's some journalists who are a bit slightly offended, but it's sort of roadkill, isn't it?
But yeah, this gets onto the point, which is a controversial one, given I have two great fashion journalists sitting with me. But it's kind of that point of, do the fashion journalists matter? Because I think a lot of the ruffled feathers were, like, it was sort of tropped out on this idea of it being, you know, people didn't think the collection was good. But I think some of it was people weren't invited and people didn't have good seats. And I wonder whether, I was having a conversation with one of my friends who works in fashion. He's the last person who I thought would defend Eddie Slimane because he doesn't like his aesthetic, but he said, you know, this criticism has just got ridiculous. It's like everyone jumping on a bandwagon, and people feel like they can because their friend did, and it almost got narcissistic from the journalists.
I think, well, fashion's built on ego, isn't it? So there was always going to be someone's nose that was put out of joint. But possibly the problem with the seating for the show, or, you know, the sort of lack of any acknowledgement of the fact that fashion has changed since he left Dior Homme, you know, that things are live streamed, that people should be able to access things, because there's no point trying to shut it down. And I think in trying to shut it down and control it totally, it just looked a bit dated. And I think, you know, ego aside, people were annoyed that he hadn't sort of perhaps embraced the chance to rebrand and do something suitable for the era he was now designing for.
So what examples do you guys have, or is there anything that's jumped out at you about a really successful, either a rebranding or a designer slotting into a house really effortlessly? Because we've talked a bit on these panels about when it works and why it doesn't, particularly in our Lanvin discussion, because we talked obviously why that works so well for Albert at Lanvin but less well in other houses. I'm interested if there's any examples where you guys have thought, you know, that works so well, that's brilliant.
Phoebe at Celine. Yeah. I mean, look at Celine before, it wasn't even on the radar, and then all of a sudden, bang, it is. And the graphic designer behind the rebranding for Celine as well, with the font that they use and everything. I can remember when Michael Kors was there and how it was before, and that the branding, even how the name looked. how it changed, went so much more refined. I think that was a classic example of a really excellent, considered rebranding.
And it sat next to her aesthetic as well, so it wasn't just let's tidy up a logo and it will all be all right on the night. It was at every level, it was well considered.
Yeah. Then you also have designers, I think Peter Copping at Nina Ricci is great for having simply continued really without any sort of song and dance. I think what he does at the moment is really lovely. It's really in tune with the sort of the heritage of the label. It seems to be what the customers want. It gets a great showing at sort of award ceremonies, red carpets, that kind of thing. And critics like it, journalists like it, and it sells. So he's ticking all the boxes, and he hasn't sort of done a fanfare about it. He's just got in and got on with it. So it is possible to do it without really sort of raising your head above the parapet, I think.
I'm conscious that we want to see some clothes, but I have one more question which I want to ask you, which is this idea of the designer as not really being a designer but being kind of a brand consultant, a creative person with their branding. And people often talk about Tom Ford like that, they say he's not a designer, he's just a wonderful brandsman, if that's a term. Is that equally as exciting as someone who's great with clothes? As fashion critics, what do you prefer? Is it quite exciting to see someone like Eddie, where it feels like it's actually more about the branding than it is about the fashion?
I think it's quite a romantic vision to sort of think of a designer as someone who's toiling away in front of a sewing machine, and that doesn't, nobody does that anymore. They have teams, they have mass production, they have all kinds of things going on that we don't really know about. So I don't know whether you have to be one or the other. I think most people are the other rather than the sort of traditional, tortured artist working alone in a garret, pricking his fingers. People have teams, they have backup. So it's not necessarily about a designer in the way it used to be. And so in that respect, perhaps everyone is a bit of a brand these days.
I see the designers, the creative directors at these houses, they're more like editors. They, like you said, they have their teams. They're not sitting there at a sewing machine twiling up new silhouettes or whatever, but they have to carefully select everything across the whole brand, and approve everything right from the mannequins that they use right through to the styling, through to the font of something. And so they're editing the whole vision that you see, and it's that eye that they have that is it's what they're paid for and what they're excellent at.
And they've got to also, because there's a lot more media on the actual designers rather than just reporting on the clothes, it's all the gossip and the moves and all of that. They have to be a little bit more of an all-rounder. They can't just be squirreled away, as you say, in a cupboard doing their thing, because if they did, you'd end up in a situation where no one knows enough about any of these people.
Exactly.
And this thirst for knowledge, they've got to give a little bit of themselves, of what's going on to the people out there who want to know about it.
I feel like someone who's done that is Christopher Bailey. He has a hand in absolutely everything, and you read the show reports from Burberry, and people write a bit about the clothes, but then they start talking about the carpet and the front row and the light fixtures, and you just think, well, everything is sort of fair game for criticism or review now, and you have to just sort of feed into that. You have to know what's going on every single aspect of these huge productions, and if you're spending that much money, then that probably makes sense.
Let's look at the fashion, but first talk to me about the men's very quickly, because what did you think of that? And what did you think of it as well?
Not a lot. It was fine. That was pretty much all I could say about it. It was okay. It wasn't. It's not my bag anyway, but it didn't set my world on fire.
Do you think the criticism of where people are like, this is going to inspire anorexia in men, do you think that was kind of fair, or do you think?
Not really, because we've been there and done that with Dior on, really. So it was. Do you know? It kind of felt to me like it was diet Dior on. Like it just wasn't. It wasn't as good as that, and yet it didn't feel Saint Laurent enough to be its own thing. So it was kind of in this kind of weird middle ground of not taking its cues from the previous women's quite heavily, which I think is a bit weird a season later anyway, but that's by the by. But not really kind of going into a place where it really felt that it was its own thing. It felt quite derivative of him in a funny way.
I was just, whenever I see it at the men's, I can't get my head around his kind of like perverse obsession with like very skinny adolescent boys. Like it's just, I just because I just don't really understand it. And also, I mean, this could just be rumour, but apparently with the whole rebranding, he axed the teams that he had in place in the stores, all of Stefano's people from before, and they went out scouting like you would for models for the people, for the sales assistants for his stores. And if you see them, they are literally like the boys off the catwalk, and they all are really tall, really skinny.
It's the anti-Abercrombie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Maybe that's what he's really about. Maybe he's trying to just like make a thing for skinny boys. But I actually got a bit pissed off with it, all that criticism, because I thought, you know, like, people get so pissed off when you see some skinny boy on the catwalk for the men's, but like it's just taken as completely normal for the women's to see sort of these. And I think the criticism was quite misplaced in the sense that it was so focused on. There's one shot of one particularly thin boy that was just put everywhere.
I thought someone should have just taken them away and given them a wash as well. I think that would have been much better for welfare-wise.
On that note, let's finally have a look at the clothes. Talk to me about this first look.
If you had shown me this and not told me where it had come from, I would not have said it was Saint Laurent. I wouldn't have said it was Yves Saint Laurent either. It's wearable. It's super wearable. And in that respect, it's a continuation of last season. But in any other respect, I don't see much. I don't see a theme. I don't see a sort of rollover of what he's been dealing with prior to this. I also am slightly foxed because there felt like there was a really specific customer last season. You know, we were talking when we did this about the sort of rock and roll girlfriend and this sort of luxe, slightly boho. I mean, anyway, it was a very specific demographic that we thought it tapped into, and in terms of you know, the sort of aesthetic vision, but also in terms of the consumer. This to me looks really quite young, and I don't think of Saint Laurent as a terribly young label. I mean,
young women can't afford high fashion.
Well, exactly, yeah. But I mean, it looks kind of teenage, which isn't a bad look. But I just wonder who he's aiming this at.
It does. It looks like throwing your cardigan over your party dress.
It's gone a bit Perry Ellis.
It's very skinned.
And that was the problem that Tim Blanks highlighted with the men's, was that all his casting was like, you know, like indie bands and cool kids and whatever. But they're buying that look for, you know, $50 somewhere, not, you know, several thousand.
There's a genuine part of me that's a bit worried that the images we're seeing the models doing their practice walkthrough rather than the collection.
Ooh.
We'll wait and see.
This is more like it. I mean, this feels. Are we seeing this in order?
Yeah, we are.
Okay, because that's very odd after those two looks. But that's what you'd expect.
Yeah.
But that coat, actually, if you go, sorry, can we just go back to that look before? That you could see selling incredibly well.
Yeah, it's quite coat.
Absolutely.
It's really beautiful. You can see it on a woman of any age. Whereas the two looks before that, no matter what you took away from that, it would always just be really, really young.
Yeah. But it's interesting as well, because I think with the last collection, the first look was very much a statement of intent. And everything that came afterwards really followed that same mould, the hats and the styling and the whole look was really coherent. With this, I mean, if that's his statement, what does it mean, and how do these fit in? I mean, actually, what he's doing, I think, quite well, is getting people talking about it from the off, because it's interesting that he started with that look.
But it is a bit Lady of the Night, like something like that.
It's so apt that you mentioned that Tim Blanks comment, because that's just my one problem with it. Is it's just, I feel like high fashion has to be high fashion. It can't just be expensive clothes for the sake of expensive clothes. And I do just look at this and I think, if you're a savvy shopper, which I think women are now, that's one of the consensus that come up with every panel, is that women are so much more educated about fashion now. They're really involved in it. You would know that you can get a look like this either vintage or on the high street. You know, why spend the high price point it is buying a dress that does look like it's from Zara? That one before that did not. I don't mean that as a real criticism of it, but it just seems to me so strange.
It's a bit, then, what's the point?
It depends on the pieces, I think, because absolutely, if you're talking about a Valdoonican cardigan and a tea dress, but the sort of the construction of a blazer is, you do see the difference when you're spending 40 quid or 4,000. You know, you absolutely do. So
like, why aren't we seeing more of it? Because that's one thing that was great about that first season, as much as I think the styling made it look a little bit more kind of like it could be on the street. There was actually a lot of beautiful tailoring in that, which is strange to me that he wouldn't open with some tailoring, and we're seeing more of it now.
But then he doesn't do what you want. I mean, that's what we've seen.
What are your thoughts, Jack?
I'm just thinking how incredibly different it is from last season, and how the woman, or shall we say girl this time, has just completely changed. But even every single look that goes along, it's like I'm seeing a different girl. I can't really identify with it yet, who it is.
That just looks like it's on sale in Camden Market. You know, there's that, but which is what's interesting, because that is the continuation, though. It's that kind of like insolence and that kind of streety LA vibe to it. And she's younger. This is more, you know, Taylor Momsen than Kate Moss, but it's still that kind of...
I would
she
say
certainly looks like a kind of Camden girl, actually. That's
it's interesting you say that, because I sort of think the only thing that's held it together so far is a sort of Frenchness, actually.
Oh, really?
A slightly moody French teenager. Maybe she's on an exchange that she wants to go home from. But that, I mean, it's quite gammy and it's quite rocky. It's I hesitate to say grunge because it's sort of overused, but it is. It's plaid and it's cardies, but not in an American way, I think.
I see what you mean. It almost as if you stripped back the styling, like the boots and, you know, some of the layered pieces that we've seen before. It's like she's got a very elegant, chic French little party dress on underneath.
Yeah, but with a scowl.
Yeah.
I like to think that a lot of the stuff that does look a little bit Camden Market would look absolutely sensational in real life, and you go, oh my god, look at how that's cut, or all the detailing in that, or
going by last season.
Doesn't that make it more perverse that you're like, why have they styled it then to look like this? Because I'm sure that dress is like absolutely beautiful, but it's put with a pair of pattern tights that no one wears.
Well, don't knock a pattern tight. I think. I mean, he's always been about understatement, and he's always been about undermining the establishment. He's always been about making expensive, luxurious things look a bit gritty or a bit grotty even, and he's still doing that. So,
but is that still relevant now? Because that's another consensus that's come out of these panels, which obviously aren't the gospel word on fashion. Lots of people agree. They are. That you know what women want now. It's a recession. The reason like real high luxury is selling so well is because, you know, women don't want to just throw away money on the sake of it. So if they're going to buy something, they want it to look really expensive. They want it to be, it's all about, that's why it's about fabric and cut now, not about kind of bells and whistles. And that just seems, to me, that's the main irrelevance of this, is it just seems sort of so different to the market that seems to be sort of pushing fashion forward.
But then if you think about the ubiquity of shirts like this one, of plaid and of those sort of patterns, then what's to stop someone who has the money deciding that they want the absolute best possible version of that, which is probably this.
That's interesting.
Going by last season and what I've seen in store now, I have a feeling that these pieces will look incredibly luxe once they're, you know, all out on the rails.
Yeah, it's almost like the styling and the hair and all of that does a disservice to the actual clothes, which defeats the object.
But then he's giving us a show, isn't he? Yeah. That means this will be...
No, he's creating his vision overall.
But then one of the things about the styling is that it's kind of styled in the way that someone would wear the sort of cheap version of it. You know, a biker jacket and a dress is not sort of breaking boundaries. So maybe he is showing us, you know, how it would work in your wardrobe. That's certainly what he did last season.
Yeah. And I think he could be showing as well how the Saint Laurent girl, and by that I don't mean the shopper, I mean the girls that, you know, he socialises with, that he cherry picks, that wear his stuff, would wear it. Because if he, you know, a favourite model would wear it like this, you know, as would one of the sort of young singers that he enjoys sort of spending time with and promoting. So I think there's an element of this being, you know, his world, even if his shopper is going to wear it in a much more refined way.
Yeah, and I guess that's what he's all about, isn't it?
Yeah, I imagine that was quite a scary thing for PPR to think about, really, was when he came in. And if he is completely changing what the Saint Laurent girl is, where does that leave their existing customers? Like, I don't know whether you've seen, is it the same people coming in, or is it a new Saint Laurent customer? Or is it too early to say?
So I think it's a bit too early to say, but I think so far it's kind of like a loyal following that have, you know, come in to see, they know it's launched and they're coming in to get it straight away.
And he did invite some of the original, you know, Yves Saint Laurent fans to his original. So he did kind of sing its praises, which I thought was quite interesting.
But what's interesting about that is that he had the sort of the coterie who knew Eve and who sort of grew up with it almost. And obviously this doesn't look the same, but perhaps there's a philosophy behind that. You know, Yves Saint Laurent did the Student Revolution collection. He clothed a lot of those sort of revolutionaries in, is it 68? I don't know. But this is, you feel like this is the sort of young guard again, and that's what I mean by it feeling still quite French. I think it's moody French teenagers, and that's who Yves Saint Laurent was designing for way back in the beginning.
That's really interesting actually, because I think a lot of immediate criticism of this would be like it's nothing to do with Saint Laurent, but it's interesting to hear that sort of more thoroughly unpicked, because there is that sort of reference between.
Maybe he's moving away this season from the criticism of his first show being too heavily archived, and maybe, I mean, this doesn't seem to show that at all, really, does it?
It's in those more subtle
Yeah,
ways.
certainly not yet. It's these cardies, isn't it?
Yeah, I think my problem
Who
is...
would have thought it? I feel like there's maybe archived snaps of Yves Saint Laurent himself wearing something a bit like that, because he was a bit of a pullover man, wasn't he?
It's making me feel really stylish, because that's my like Saturday afternoon outfit right there on the catwalk. Feeling good. I think there are quite a lot of looks. So should we? Yeah, there are. Okay. Neil's nodding with a tired face.
I was just going to say, in terms of going back to sort of thinking about building a brand, I think maybe he's doing something incredibly clever, which is he knows, because of the sort of Twitter sphere or whatever, the fact that these looks will be everywhere within, well, we've got them, but in the next day they will be accessible to everyone. If you're a 14-year-old who's interested in fashion, you can sort of make your own version of this very easily. So actually maybe he's trying to sort of, I don't know, inculcate a new... I don't think he's democratizing, but he's playing to maybe a new generation of people who could be interested in that. It's accessible to look at, if not to buy.
Maybe it's one of those things that in 2-3 years' time we'll all be sitting there going,
Yeah.
So that's what he was up to.
He's waiting for them to grow up, and then they'll
when he's ruling the world.
Yeah.
But we were talking about that actually, interesting with our Medium Kirchhoff discussion. We talked about the idea of, the reason they have such a cult following, which will probably translate to incredibly strong sales in like 5 or 10 years, is that element of you can craft this yourself. And which is quite, because that's how fashion works. If you talk to anyone who works in fashion, they always like, when I was 14 and I was living in the home counties, I used to make my own version of Yoji. And it is that kind of thing. You can see that with this as like 15-year-old girls who are obsessed with Cara, being like, oh, I've got a duffel coat, I can make that work.
Yeah, I think this could definitely be quite a sort of a rich source for Pinterest, this show. It's aspirational, and that's what he's always been about. It's what the label has always been about as well, to some extent.
And it's street driven, which is very apt as well. That coat, actually, the one that Cara was wearing before, that is actually really beautiful as well, because some of the duffel coats from the men's are incredible.
This is a dream show if you're sitting on the design team for Zara or Topshop, really, isn't it? You'll just be, every single look is going to be up on the walls being ripped off.
But that's what's so perverse about it, because you'll be able to buy it in Zara in like 4 weeks' time, because they'll be able to turn it around quicker. That's what I think that's why I kind of can't get my head around it.
But yeah, for all the complaints about him being in an ivory tower or not giving people seats and all of that, this is essentially democratic, because as I said, it seems so accessible. And he's sort of, it has come from the streets. It's youth. It's now. It doesn't feel like high fashion. It's not off-putting at all.
And you do think, why is that in a sense seen as less valid and less creative than a designer drawing on, the way women used to dress in the 40s? If like something that looks more otherworldly, I think we're more inclined to think of it as more creative, but actually there's something that's quite, it's equally as interesting to see someone look at the street as it is to look at the street in the 40s.
What's the theory about vintage is 25 years old, so what he's done is reference something much more recent than that. This feels a bit 90s, but it actually feels a bit 2001 to me as well. So that's not necessarily a criticism. What's interesting is that you don't often get designers raking through an archive that's so recent. And we discussed that a bit with last season's show, because it felt, a lot of people said it felt like it came from the time when he left Dior, which is interesting. If that's what he knows, why shouldn't he sort of go back and look through that?
Well, it's generally kind of like a rule of thumb for designers that you don't dredge up anything from the last 10 years. That's a bit of a kind of known across
Yeah.
the world.
Maybe that's why it's revolutionary then.
Well, exactly.
He's just turning all the rules on its head.
Yeah.
Doing Twitter and Pinterest through not telling anyone anything.
Exactly.
But then it's
Exactly.
interesting because you think if in actually 20 years time you were like, show us some high fashion that reflects what everyone was wearing at that specific time, there would be nothing that would encapsulate how sort of young people dress at the moment than what he's doing right now. You know, if you looked at what you saw on any other huge brand, even some, you know, like incredible brands, whether it's like Prada or, you know, Jill Sander, nothing is actually as telling as about how people dress.
Yeah.
Even how people wear high fashion, because even
Yeah.
people, you know, if you see the celebrities who can genuinely afford, like Saint Laurent, they wear it in this way. You know, they wear that bag.
Can we just go back a look a second? Because this is the model that he used for his menswear campaign.
Yeah.
Who you see semi as kind of, you know, you're
She's
not sure
in the
if it's a
Bowie video
guy
as
or...
well.
And actually what I'm picking up on this is something that they were talking about from last season. Apparently, that a lot of the pieces up in womenswear are interchangeable, that men are supposed to be able to buy as well.
He's made his shoes, his men's shoes, available in women's sizes.
So maybe the plaid pieces that you're seeing are, you know, designed for that kind of skinny, you know, rock star kind of guy. Maybe that is the whole
It's another
point
example of breaking the
some of these
rules.
pieces.
He's making it all unisex.
Well, that's not, I mean, that's an Yves Saint Laurent trope though, isn't
Yeah,
it? You know, it was
completely.
women in men's clothing, but also under Stefano Pilati there was Edition 24, I think it was called, and it was supposed to be, supposedly a whole unisex range. I think they sort of tucked the jackets a bit for women, but it was supposed to be interchangeable. It was supposed to be sort of anyone could go in regardless of gender, pick out the piece that they want and walk away with it. So again, that's a kind of tradition that he's playing into, and you wouldn't expect it. Certainly from looking at it, it doesn't seem apparent.
And this was interesting what you were saying about the men's feeling a bit derivative from the women's from the season before, because I know it's only 3 seasons in, so it's hard to kind of completely mark this out as a pattern, but maybe that's what he's going to do, you know, take a few items, whether for this one, what stands out to me are those shirts and the duffel coats from the collection from the men's, take that to the women's, then take something from the women's to the men's, which is quite...
Well, yeah, because the interesting thing to note with this is that the pre looked as commercial as this does, which is not always the case with a lot of houses. So it is just, it feels more like a kind of retail story in a way for like, right, well, I'm going to constantly have stuff in and I'm not going to play around with themes too crazily, so that if the thing that you've bought for $4,000 then is not going to sit next to the stuff that I'm bringing out 6 months later. So in that regard, that's bright as well, because you know, I think they're, not to get too geeky, but they were up like 40% revenue for 2012, Yves Saint Laurent, which is huge. So and obviously that's not off of the back of what it is done just yet, but that's a huge surge considering they were hemorrhaging cash a while back. So now they're going in the right direction. Maybe this is a part of that whole, right, new guy, let's sort out the brand, let's figure out what it's all about, and let's give it a proper retail hook rather than going, well, here we are every 6 months and you can figure it out for yourself.
It's one of those things, isn't it? It's like, what constitutes success? Is it the press raving about it, or is it the numbers and the buyers, you know, ordering the whole collection? Because last season, when I first looked at it before I heard anything at all, I just kept looking at the collection, seeing piece after piece, and I thought, that's brilliant, Middle Eastern customers going to love that, love that, love that. And when I spoke to the buyers about it, they said the same thing. They said, oh, this just confirms how, you know, we've done the right move, we're going to have the whole collection, it's really going to sell. And it's selling, you know, and they've had the best buy ever.
But that's what, it goes back to this point about, you know, the role of the journalist, because that's one thing that a few of the more negative reviews kind of begrudgingly admitted. They were like, this will probably translate to quite good sales, and then you kind of think, well, like, if you're slagging it off, what do you critique? Yeah, exactly. And I know there's an element of it's interesting to have amazing fashion criticism, and I think no one would want to kind of get rid of fashion criticism, but then it is at this difficult point, especially when retailers are moving into editorial, because you start to think, actually, if something sells, that's going to be the ultimate say.
Yeah, but it's interesting as well, because I don't think you've had a generation of journalists who have discussed or criticised clothes. They've criticised style and fashion and design and high design, or, you know, pop culture or highbrow, whatever. They haven't just spoken about clothes. These are clothes that are made to be worn. That makes them much harder to write about without drawing comparisons that ultimately feel a bit banal, I think. So it might be that collections like this change how people write about fashion. I don't know whether that's a sort of sweeping statement, but certainly fashion criticism normally seems to focus on the sort of loftier things, the more grandiose pieces.
No, that's actually a really interesting point, because with this, you can't criticise it because it's how people dress. And
exactly.
If you're a fashion critic, you're criticising how people dress. It's
but that's what Chanel did. No one really knew how to write about the jersey pieces. No one could figure out what on earth she was doing. They were just clothes to be worn. That doesn't make them any less valid, as we have seen. With what happened there. That's an incredible label built on wearability. This may be the same thing. That's what Yves Saint Laurent wanted to do.
But this gets into the idea of the role of the critic, which is obviously something that's really interesting to us here at SHOWstudio, because we try and sort of change the way people talk and criticise and critique, is perhaps a better word, fashion. But it is this sense, fashion is often seen as something that isn't criticised enough, and the criticism that we get isn't, whether it's honest enough or smart enough or driven from the correct places. And I'm interested where you guys stand on this, whether you think that, we do have problems with fashion criticism, or whether you think that actually it's kind of a moot point, it's an industry built on sales and advertisers, what can we do?
I always think it's a bit on the fence. And then when somebody does say something that's a bit cutting, I kind of lean into the computer or my iPad even more, because I kind of like it. Actually. I was like, somebody's actually speaking their mind. This is interesting.
But that's what was funny with this, is it felt like one person did that, then everyone was like, phew, we can do that too. Everyone kind of jumped on the bandwagon. They're like, well, they can't pull advertising from all of us, so we'll all do it. It's that safety in numbers mentality.
I don't know. I think I like to think that there are enough, or at least the good ones out there, have built their reputations upon calling a spade and a dog. And if it is a dog of a collection, then they've said it. And okay, there might have been a lot of other people on the periphery that will have felt empowered by the bigger players in the middle saying their bit and going, well, we didn't really like that, and they got involved. But I kind of feel like if you're talking about the people who are doing fashion criticism really well, whether or not you agree with it, you've got to at least respect their opinion on it. That's my 2 pennies.
But then it's weird, because fashion is about taste, whether it's good or bad taste or personal, or whether it's a sort of wider debate of I like this so everyone else has to. But certainly, or traditionally, a fashion editor's role is to provide good taste. So perhaps there isn't any point focusing on things that they don't really like. So I mean, obviously there's some machinations of commercial things and advertisers and all of that. But at the same time, it seems to be a waste of space sometimes to focus on things that aren't good. If people don't want to wear it, then why give it the sort of airtime?
But do you not think that now that fashion's become more of a kind of a popular thing in a sense, it's almost a source of entertainment, and there is this thirst for it, that it's moved away from, that has changed the scope a little bit from being about, what telling.
Yeah. It's like celebrities falling over. It's like, you see the sort of feet of clay maybe. But I do think when people are reading magazines that are full of products, magazines now are just pages of things to buy. If everyone hates it, you're not going to put it on a page. So
that's what's interesting with the internet, because I think people are quite scathing of the internet. And fashion treats the internet with kind of such trepidation. But you think, actually, it's one of the only outlets left. I'm not trying to blow our own trumpet too much here, but I am doing. Where you can criticise fashion, because as you say, a magazine, what's the point of writing a lengthy article slagging off a collection or something? There's just no point.
No, you won't get the page in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Who was it that really criticised the bloggers recently?
Susie.
I liked one line that she said in that, though. She said was kind of like her basic rule of thumb in fashion journalism was, I like something because it's good, it's not good because I like it. And I think that's what she was saying about the bloggers, when they write some of them when they write their pieces or state their opinion on some of the shows. And I think that is kind of made me think about it, actually. It's like what you're saying about taste level.
But that's my problem with magazines. Sometimes I feel like as much as I agree with the sense of don't write about something if it's not bad, like it's about taste, so put in the stuff that's good. That's obviously magazine's purpose. But I don't feel like the editors who are curating the content of a magazine put stuff in because they think it's good. They put it in because their page put it in, or they put it in because it's an advertiser. We were talking to some stylists we've had on the panels about having to shoot head to toe looks, and if you read any magazine, you know that mascara's in there because it's an advertiser. It's not because it's brilliant, and you know that there's a head to toe Armani look because there has to be a head to toe Armani look. It's not because they were like, God, that's good this season.
Interestingly, about the idea of head to toe, I don't know what the Saint Laurent policy is, but a lot of labels sort of, when stylists are calling things in, say you have to shoot everything as a coherent look, it all has to be together. I was just thinking that you could shoot a head to toe look of this collection, and it would look like you'd styled it. I mean, obviously we were saying the styling is sort of inherent to the look anyway, but that's quite a canny move.
Isn't it a bit out on a limb if you were putting a shoot together, because this is so commercial and so, I know it's a bit of a dirty word, but it is. As a stylist, you would probably want to have your own take on it, so you can recontextualise it in amongst all the other brands that are doing their thing.
But then in context, it's kind of there, isn't it? Trend klaxon. There's 90s. There's a bit of leather. It's a bit punky.
I think the reason it looks so like you're saying, like it could just go straight into an editorial, is because of this whole interchangeable concept of it, that it looks like that her boyfriend could wear the what is it, a jacket or whatever that's thrown over that dress. And also I'm kind of seeing with some of the looks that I don't know if I've just plucked this out of thin air, but did Yves Saint Laurent used to say that he was a designer that used to like to dress mother and daughter? That was one of his... I don't know. I think I might have...
Let's just say he did. That's fine.
He did. But some of the looks actually look like there's like a very grown-up piece layered over a very kind of like Topshop-y dress. So you could imagine... So it's kind of like boyfriend, girlfriend, mother, daughter in some of the looks. So
that's why I wanted to stop on that look, because that's... You can see that dress taken and shot in an incredibly beautiful, quite demure even, really gorgeous setting and styled in a really interesting way. But then with the addition of the boots and the kind of shirt type jacket thing, and that's interesting with this collection, is that element of you know it's picked apart and put on the rail.
Yeah, I mean I don't know whether someone do specify that you had to shoot full looks, but I think if they did, that would just be another sort of signal of how that kind of control
sort of
of the branding like it is, because unless you absolutely have to, who's going to want to shoot it if you haven't got the creative freedom to do your own thing with it?
That's what's so strange to me about I'm just telling you all my opinions. That's what's so strange to me about this, you know, there's this like kind of like fear, I think, from a lot of us journalists about retailers who are doing magazines, and everyone's like, oh, you know, but they can't be honest with their editorial, it's such like they're just going to sort of promote what they're selling online. But then you think actually, like, in a way that is more authentic and more real than an actual magazine, because with a retailer they have gone on a punt and bought what they genuinely think is good and what is genuinely going to sell, whereas with a magazine they are just promoting what the advertisers asked them to promote. So there's almost an element where it is more authentic to have a retailer really pushing what they think is good because they've taken a punt on it and actually bought it, whereas a magazine it is much more of a commercial game in a sense. I don't know what I think about that, but it gets me a bit.
But I think
that's interesting.
In both those respects, in this show, there's a sense of things being pushed both commercially and editorially. I mean, he's definitely taken both into account. And this look, I think, is both. You know, it's a trophy jacket. Everyone loves calling them that.
I can see, like, I just see things in such commercial ways sometimes. And that jacket is the perfect, what every woman of a certain age comes in for and wants to cover their arms, like, and wants to go to an event and wear that kind of dressy jacket, and yet the dress underneath it is for maybe a younger girl. So it's like two women in that look.
But that jacket could look completely different, as you say, like when styled on an older woman with much more.
But no one young is going to, well, not no one, but that's probably going to be, it's embellished and it's going to be so expensive that very few young girls are going to be able to afford that.
I just feel like I've seen that so many times.
Yeah, but I quite like that. There's like a familiarity in that. You know, sometimes like fashion like can make you feel good in that kind of nostalgia.
Yeah.
I don't know. See, that's not what I get excited about. I like the bloody hell, I've never seen that before. And how they're so clever how they've done that. That's the bit about fashion that gets me going. And I think just holding a mirror up to the street is not tickling my fancy.
Do you know what though? I think it's almost like he plays down how luxe some things, like that piece underneath, I bet is exquisite if you were just looking at, you know, that, I don't know what it is.
But isn't that's just Kate Moss in Calvin Klein at her birthday when she's like 20, you know, it's so, you think, then that's the thing that confuses me about it, because I'm like, why not try and make it look incredible? You can still make it look street, but also look incredible.
I don't know how that fits in.
Was this what you were expecting?
No,
not at all. Not at all. I still think that feels quite French. This is like watching a different show.
What is this?
Maybe that's the point.
Is there a new girl band or something that's coming down?
Okay.
What are they wearing? Do we have a closer up shot of that? Or is that, no, that's just the last, they're all little leather dresses.
That looks very 90s, doesn't it?
Mm.
And that's the clothing. That's such
Yeah,
a
such
strange
a
clothing
contrast
look to
between
me.
that.
He's clearly got a master plan, hasn't he? I mean, it's
He
clearly,
hopes so.
But what
it's
is
so
it?
arbitrary that it must have been thought through to within an inch of its life.
What do you think reaction to this is going to be?
Befuddlement.
Yeah, general head scratching.
But I mean, having said that, I don't
Reaction.
think it's bad. I think people will like it. I think it will, as you said, people will buy it.
He's almost playing the fashion world at their own game because he's like, you can't criticise this because it's how all your non-fashion friends, all your kids, all the girls you know dress.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to sort of turn it on your... Because it makes the fashion community look so lofty if they slag off how people on the street actually dress, doesn't it? So you look genuinely really confused.
I am. This is live reaction. I'm taken aback. It's like considerably less dramatic. It's considerably less kind of, I don't know. It's insanely commercial, like to within an inch of its life. And I do really hope that there is, when it gets into store, it looks the business and doesn't fall flat, and there is that work in it, and you will know where all your hard-earned thousands of pounds are going, because if you held that up against the dress on the high street and you couldn't really tell the difference, you'd feel pretty shortchanged by Saint Laurent, not by Toppers or...
Yeah. I think I meant to say before, I saw before the show someone was tweeting the inspiration, apparently the invite came with a sort of booklet. Did you see that?
Yeah, with the...
and some of the pictures looked incredibly kind of ethereal, they're black and white, they're a bit fuzzy, they looked like etchings rather than photos.
They were Theodora Allen paintings.
Oh, is that what they were?
Yeah.
Okay. There was one that looked, there was a sort of couple kissing. It looked very sort of classic and romantic, and I just don't know how you get from that to this, and that's not a value judgment.
It's the rockstar girlfriend again thing. It's about young people. The girls in this collection, they look like they're coming home from having been with their boyfriends with those, and it's like a modern romance, that doesn't seem particularly romantic or aspirational. It's a blast from the past, though.
Flick back through a few of them, just so.
You just don't think you'll see a Peter Pan Hollywood.
I don't think she's coming back from a romance. I think it's more of a one-night stand, really.
But that's modern romance, isn't it?
Is it?
Get the time. Please don't tweet that, Grace. How embarrassing.
There is, I suppose actually, when having seen it in full, there is that rockstar girlfriend still there. That it's still a bit mossy, isn't it? But you certainly wouldn't get that from the sort of first few looks. It felt like a complete departure. Maybe it's to his credit that from that he can sort of bring it back, no matter how different it is. It still feels like it's the same woman at the end.
Woman,
I wish I could
really
see what
true.
the print was, the last look and the one just before this.
It's like a ditzy floral.
Is it a
Yeah,
floral?
there's something a bit Luella Bartley about something.
Yeah. But having said that, what I found really interesting, and this is kind of from doing all the panels, is we've all said it's insanely commercial. We've all said it's inspired by the street, but there hasn't been one panel where people have been as dumbfounded by a collection as this one, which is part of its genius, that we've seen things that are, inspired by these incredibly lofty things, but we've been able to talk about them and pick them apart so easily.
Yeah.
But this one is much like, it's insanely commercial. It's got us all kind of scratching our heads, which is...
But that's kind of what we were saying about going back in time, but kind of not far enough, because no one is ready to discuss what happened 4 years ago. People are still living that, it seems. So maybe he's doing something incredibly avant-garde by going back to something that feels terribly recent and sort of, like something we all experience, therefore we're all experts in it already.
Kind of feels like the format of a catwalk presentation isn't quite right for this, or I don't know. It feels like you need to know more information about the clothes to get it, but I don't know whether, I'm assuming if they're all in a showroom, you would go up and go, oh my god, that leather's amazing, or that, look at how that's cut, or the detail of that, or how that's finished, or whatever. It kind of feels like you need to be a bit more hands-on with this stuff to get the point of it a bit more. So obviously it costs a hell of a lot of money to hire out the Grand Palais, isn't it?
The Grand Palais,
but maybe the money's better spent doing something a bit different, I don't know.
But that was interesting, they did that with their pre-fall, you know, the way they shot that on Sky Ferrero.
Yeah,
it was
but then you couldn't see any of it. It was so dark and contrasty. You couldn't actually see the clothes. Yeah.
But maybe that's a sort of a new type of exclusivity, that you do want to go up and touch it, but unless you've got the money to and you're trying it on, you're probably not going to.
Fair enough.
I'm just so shocked by it. I don't know what to say. I've literally got nothing left. So what?
I think it's interesting that none of us have actually really spoken about the pieces as separates, or as, and we've spoken about how they would be on the hanger and how you'd want to touch them, and, but actually they don't add up to a collection by themselves.
It's anti-fashion in that way. There's no it piece, there's no obvious climax, there's no real story.
You couldn't really say what the theme was or what the
No.
feeling was.
That'd be a nightmare to merchandise. Like visually merchandise, I would have thought then. Because you put all the ditzy florals together, and then you've got like power dresses on one end and then Peter Pan collars at the other. It's going to look
and
a bit...
cardi in between.
Yeah.
And then the really sharp tailoring, and then like, you know, these kind of plaid shirts and things.
And a biker boot or whatever we've got.
It's ironic that H&M showed for the first time Paris, isn't it? If you'd have shown me these images out.
Are we on the wrong panel? It's like
God, don't say that.
Universe.
Well, shall we give him a confused but enthusiastic round of applause to wrap
I
things
think
up?
so.
Yes.
I think he might have won.
Yeah, I think he's beaten us. He's beaten us
that's
to
what
a
it
point where we're all like, what's going on? Good. He's playing us at our own game.
We'll understand it in 6 months.
To be continued, I think.
Yeah, that's good to be continued. Great. Well, thank you so much, guys. Let's
Thanks for
clap
having us.
just because it's tradition. Thank you.